We're up to the end of Sif base. This Ramah, what we're going to learn now, is a very, very important Ramah. The question comes when you hire someone for work and you didn't say how long the contract would be. Or you did say, so what, or you just say, I'll pay you a yearly salary. You tell someone you're hired for this job and you're getting a yearly salary, so much and so much. What does that mean? He's hired forever, not hired forever? Because there's many different halachas, This question comes up not just in a private business, but this real question came up as a guy was a shochet in a city, or the rabbi in a city. You give him so they're not articulating the contract, all the details. So when you hire someone, the question is always for how long is he hired? So the Ramah is talking about, let's see, the Ramah is talking about Melamed, a teacher, shehisken atzmin l'shnei shonim. He hired himself for there's a contract for 2 years. The teacher comes and he's going to teach in the school, let's say, and he's going to teach for 2 years. The hiskul shuna reshoina, he began the first year. Hiskul gam l'shu shenini, that means he's hired for 2 years. That means like this, at the end of Sif base, Shin Lamed Gimel Sif base, that's the Ramah. But he's trying, Shin Lamed Gimel, the end of Sif base, the smaller letters. End of. So let me explain what's going on over here. You don't have it? Yeah, the Ramah. And how it? Let's see. Seat base. Yeah, it's page. Base. Right here. It doesn't have a page. It's before Siv Gimel. It's Chav Gimel Amid Base right here. So, again, it's really, I could say the whole thing already, it's just a very short Ramah. And this Ramah is based many of the questions of the schools when they fire a teacher. They don't like the teacher, how long he's hired, how long he's not hired, So let me first explain what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about, and then I will explain, the practicality that comes down. The Shulchan Aruch is saying, let's say you hire someone for 2-year contract. You're hired for 2 years. 2 years. Now remember we said once a guy starts working, that's when the contract begins. Not by the signing. Remember we spoke about it last week and 2 weeks ago, that the betchilis hamalocha. See, let's just forget the signing itself. Let's just say, I'm telling you, you're hired for 2 years. So when does that obligation begin? It begins from the first day you started working. There is a binding contract. I'm going to be there for 2 years, and you're obligated to me for 2 years. It's a two-way street. We'll speak about it later again, what does a contract mean? But let's first put away the contract aside. You verbally agreed, you're hired for 2 years. Till the first day you start working, he could fire you and you could quit. You could explain that it's not ethical, but there's no more monetary obligations. Let's say you quit the day before you teach and the school is panicking now. You got to find a teacher, cost them a lot more money. You're not financially obligated for that. It wasn't an ethical thing to do because you got them stuck. But there's always a question, what's ethics? And the guy is not an ethical person, he quit. Can we make him pay for this? So we said when a guy's the first day of work, it became a binding contract. So the Ramah is saying the first day of work is binding for 2 years now. Since we said, I'm hiring you for 2 years, just like everyone understands, but if you didn't save 2 years, it means you're going to teach this whole entire year. We can't look for teachers in the middle of the year. We need a teacher to teach the school year. So if the guy says, they tell him, we a 2-year contract, the first day you're working, that sort of solidify the contract. So now you became obligated to each other. That's what the Ramah is talking about. So the truth is that the question always comes up nowadays. I always tell people, it's always worth to pay $1,000 for a lawyer to write out a contract. Simple contract, and then to get into trouble. Anyone in business knows this. It's always worth it. It's to write down. There's no misunderstanding because, very often everything's going to work out. Not everything is going to work out. Things don't work out. You wake up in the morning every morning and you think today is going to be a smooth sailing day. I'm waiting for that day to happen. Which day? Which day is smooth sailing? Which day doesn't have headaches and disappointments and doesn't exist? So, you start your business, you think, this guy job is going to be smooth sailing. I haven't found out yet. So the truth is, the best thing is you write down clearly what the obligation is. But if you didn't write down, so it's nowadays, let's say a school hires a teacher, and didn't say how long he's going to teach. So there's a huge machlokes in the poskim. And there were many din Torahs, Baruch Hashem, today the schools became smarter and do write contracts, but years ago, there was problems with this in many of the local schools. They didn't write clear contract. So all of a sudden they say, we don't want to hire you. The guy says, what do you mean? I thought I have a contract with you, So there's always the question. And the truth is that on this halacha we follow how the industry works. If the industry, let's say if school teachers works, that every year is a new contract, so then they're not obligated to it the next year. They just have, the industry has a program saying that by the time Pesach comes, if they didn't tell you you're fired, you're hired. That's how the schools work, because they can't expect them to find a job at the end of the school year for another place. But not all industry works this way.
What industry are you looking at? Just the Jewish firm schools?
But if you're a lawyer, how do you know how the industry your lawyer works? So a guy, I don't know, how, if there's a standard industry thing, then we say that's how you accepted the contract. If there is no standard, then we have to find out, then it's two opinions. One opinion is that if there is no standard, that nothing was made up, as long as you're competent, he really cannot fire you. We'll later learn what happens if he does, and we'll get into details. But if he's competent, let's say he says, I will have my nephew. He needs a job. And you're nice, you worked 10 years for me, it's very, very nice, I really appreciate it, and we had a good business deal going, but now my nephew needs a job. So many hold, if there is no industry rules and regulars, know how it works, then the job is further. Otherwise, no. Otherwise, say, if I'm paying you a salary for a year, so much is so much, if that's how we made up, every year it's a new contract. Since I said to you, your salary is going to be so much, so much. It's a huge machlokes in the Shulchan Aruch. And for that reason, when there's a din Torah, when they dispute, we always have to find a way how you see how the industry works and figure out how to paskin.
What do we say that in America, aside for jobs where you're really being hired for a specific job or a specific amount of time, like teaching, you're being hired for a year, that makes sense. But a normal job, if you hire an attorney in your office, you know, either it works out and you keep the guy, or after a while, if it doesn't, you let him go. Right? Like there's, what do you say that the establishment?
Well, there is in your industry, there's such a thing. We hire someone, and there's no thing that you can't fire them, and you do let go people all the time.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so,
but
normally,
I'm saying that industry. I see my daughter has a business this way too, and she tells me her industry it works. You're hiring, you know, there's no obligation. If it doesn't work out and she is not quick enough and doesn't do a good job, she says, I'm sorry, it's too overwhelming for you. I'm letting you go. But there are businesses, the Moshe, some Sefer says, there was never such a thing you could fire a Sheikhet. Sheikhet was the one who does the slaughtering, the Shechita, or the rabbi in town. It was the contract was only for the benefit of the rabbi. The city becomes obligated unless he finds a better job. That's how the tradition was for hundreds of years, he says.
Yeah, but that's not the tradition anymore, I don't think.
No, it depends which shul you're talking about.
Certain shuls on the bread, they go through rabbis like every year. There's another one in there. You know,
Not some.
I'm just saying, so like, obviously
Yeah.
That's why Muhammad is thinking of Halacha because
Halacha has nothing to do with this. Last week you asked me the same question. Halacha, we'll later learn about it. You want to, since Yankee is bothering the Halacha. No, nothing to do. Let me explain what Halacha is, because everyone asked me last week and 2 weeks. So let me explain that. Unfortunately, I was in the Din Torah twice for Chabad about this Halacha. So Halacha means severance pay. It means they had a teacher working, and the teacher was let go. Now, before I explain this, I want to say a very important halacha. If a teacher doesn't do their job, you're allowed to fire them. There's no such a thing, a teacher working 20 years, how do you fire him?
even mid-year?
Yes, he doesn't do his job. But this happened 3 years ago, one of the local schools, not a Chabad school. They decided the guy's just not doing his job, and they wanted to come to the Tauber, and I spoke to them, and you're right. I mean, whatever reason, he was going through a terrible stress in his private life, but he wasn't teaching. He wasn't able to keep the job. The school is not obligated. The students don't have to lose out because somehow the teacher is not coping. It's very, unfortunately, you're not coping in any business. Any business you have a lawyer, and the secretary is not coping with her personal situation. I'm sorry, I would love to have you in the job, but if you cannot cope. So a Rabbi is the same, the only saying this, many people think that a Rabbi in a school you can't fire. If he gets old, as we call this, burnt out, it's very nice. You work for 25 years in the school, but you're an older man, you're not doing your job, you're allowed to fire him like a tchila. He's got to be a teacher. The first thing is got to be a teacher. But the question is about severance pay. Severance pay is not an obligation, it's a mitzvah. But in Chabad, the Lubavitcher has a famous letter. Not that I'm a bookie in any of the letters, but when sitting on the Torah, I had to find out what Chabad's opinion is about the severance pay. And Lubavitcher said very clearly to his schools that they have to pay severance pay. And I don't know why the school was arguing, was a Chabad school arguing, but it clearly says you have to pay severance pay. And if I remember well, even if in such a situation where he cannot cope, and that's why he had to be sent away. I think that was the question then, and I don't want to just say so clearly without looking up, but I think that was really the question. The Rebbe was not coping well, and the question was, should he get severance pay? Well, he was teaching for many years, and the meaning was that Chodesh Lashana, that's when everyone quits. It means if every year that he taught, they give him a severance pay a month. That means if he taught 10 years, he gets 10 months of severance pay. Do you understand? That means for each year teaching, he gets a month's salary. That's what the salary. Now most schools adapted that. They're not because the Baba Shebin wrote it because many schools were doing it. And he just, I think, said that it's a good idea and it's an important thing to do. Okay, but that's not an obligation, and the school has a right to write in the contract no severance pay. You know that you could write into the contract and say, we don't pay severance pay. You know, they could, you want the job, that's how the job is. If you quit or if we fire you, there is no severance pay. See? And money, we could make up anything. I told people in my neighborhood, when there's a few houses still have under rent control, if you rent it out, do yourself a favor and tell the guy, if he's a firm guy, that I'm renting an apartment, everyone wants to live next to the shul, but there is no rules of rent control. Now, legally, it's not binding, but you can, in Halacha, in the Torah, it's binding. We made a deal that so you're charging rent a year, and if I want to go up whatever I want, I could go up after a year. There's no, even though legally, but we could make a t'nai, you know what a condition, stipulation, and that is binding in Halacha. You can make a stipulation, you're hired to teach, but if whatever reason we don't want to get you were fired, when there is no severance pay, there's nothing wrong making such a condition. Okay? Anyway, so I just, this Ramah is a tiny Ramah Shulchan Aruch, but whenever there is a dispute, the Torah means when we have a court case like this, it's a very complicated to understand each business, how it runs and how to do. Most often we do come to a compromise because very often we don't know exactly how the thing. That's why I always tell people, if you work for someone or you hire someone, do yourself the biggest favor. Get yourself a lawyer. It's worth the money to write a contract. Simple. Okay, let's then start Sivra. Halacha, there's no such a thing. But it's lifted Mishira Sadin. It's called, and that's what I was saying. The Babich Rebbe really wanted the school should follow that thing. Well, he talked about schools directly, and all the, not just schools. If I'm not mistaken, how does it go in Chabad? If there's a shliach and he hires a junior shliach, even if I think that was the case, I think it was talking about also. Yeah, there should be. I think so. But I sat on the Torahs. So usually, exactly, but again, I sat recently on the Torah and two shluchim, and they were relatives, and the reason they got into trouble there was no contract written. We are relatives. So what? You're relatives. So, you remember what happened, what you spoke about this 5 years ago? Now that it's a silly thing not to write. I tell this to everyone over and over. It's a silly thing not to write down clearly. Okay, so Siv Gimel is halacha. Now it's a very interesting halacha. Hischel apoi b'melucha. What happens? A guy starts working. V'chuze boy v'chatzi hayoyim. Middle of the day, he quits. Now let me explain this halacha over here. The Gemara said that the Torah says avudai. We say them davening. The Klal Yisrael is Hashem's slaves, but we're not anyone else's slave. So the Halacha says to us that you cannot make a person not quit his job. That means if a person is hired to work by the hour, not a kabbalah, you are hired to work to teach 5 hours a day. So it's an hourly job. Now this really. We'll get to the details later. There's two ways. In the times of the Shulchan Aruch, I want to tell you something very interesting. Times of the Tanya, times of Nachman Breslov, they used to hire Rebbe differently. You were in charge to make sure my son knows this Masechta. It was a whole different today. We're quite happy. That's a Bar Mitzvah Rebbe. In those days, you wanted this. You have to teach my child the end of the year, but it's a job. You must learn. If it takes you 10 hours, 5 hours, I don't care. He must know this Masechta by heart. That's how you used to hire Rebbe. Someone showed me an interesting contract, a Polish contract, where the Rebbe, very old, it was 200 years old, someone showed me, where the contract was, it was a young boy, he has to learn with him Chumash and Rasha, and the entire Orach Chaim Ohr HaChaim is one of the commentaries known in Polish, and always learned it. A very famous commentary. So part of the contract was that's what you have to. Was a rich person, private Rabbi, and he wrote down this is what you have to teach him every week. This besides the Gemara. So that is, even though it's for the year, but that is I want to make sure he knows it. So that's a different job. That's if he knows it in 5 hours, I did my job. But if it takes him 20 hours, so it's like saying I'm going to the dentist. He says, for this cavity, I'll charge you so much. Okay, you charge me in much. He'll do it in a half hour, could be in an hour. But you're charging me for the cavity, fixing the cavity. So too, there was an hourly job and there's a job. And you hire someone in your business to work for you, it's an hourly job. If the Torah says he has a right to quit. You cannot hold him back from quitting, because if you hold him back from quitting, it's sort of a slave thing. So he has a right to quit. But we'll later learn, if it's a loss for the owner, then he's not allowed to quit. And if he does quit, he has a right to ask him for money for that. We'll get to cases. Let's say you hired someone to do a job. It's a hourly job, but if you quit in middle, it's a disaster. Imagine a guy was hired, a musician, to play at the wedding. So it's a play it's going to play for the hour. They hire musicians. If anyone knows of the weddings, from the beginning of the wedding, you're hired from 5 o'clock to 11 o'clock, let's say. After 3 hours, he says, you know what, we're quitting. And he's got to get new musicians now. Imagine a Yiddish chassan, a Chassidish chassan without music. Or the photographer. You hire the photographer to take pictures. Photographer comes much earlier, the colors to, let's say from 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock to 11 o'clock. After 3 hours, the photographer says, you know what? I decided to quit. Who's going to take a picture of the dance, of the mitzvah dance? So that's called the Dover Ovid. We'll later see how we do this. But if it's not a Dover Ovid, then a person has a right to quit. Otherwise, if you don't let him to quit, he's like a slave. That's the halacha. So he says, now the chiddush is, the Mechaber is saying, let's say this guy demanded the money up front. Well, they agreed. The guy was desperate for money, and he said, you know what, pay me ahead of time for the whole year. So he paid him ahead of time. It doesn't have to be a year. It could be a day's work. He says, I'll work for you for today. You're going to do me a favor. I need the money in the morning. I want to give my wife the money to do shopping. He gave him the money. Can he quit middle of the day? The Shulchan Aruch says yes. He can quit middle of the day, because if he cannot quit, you make him into a slave. So right now has no money to pay. He took the money. Understand what happened? I say in English, he forwarded the money. The worker had the money before he did his work. Normally, don't pay your worker till he finished the job. It's a famous Gemara. Don't pay till he finish the job, you pay him. But somehow he was nice and he gave him ahead of time, and he quits, and right now he spent the money already. He could quit, and if we can, the money will be an obligation. I want to explain something. The Shach over here.
I can always quit?
I could always quit. Let me just say, the Shach says that it's a long Shach, only if he knows there's a way that he could pay. He doesn't have the money right now, but money's coming in. Let's say he knows he's quitting. There is no way he knows how he's going to be able to pay. Then he's not allowed to quit, because it's called Dover Ovid. Again, the Dover Ovid means when if you quit the job, it's a great loss for the people around. You're not allowed to quit. Like the musician, a photographer, or later in other cases, by quitting middle of the day, it's a terrible loss. Then if he does quit, we'll later learn there's monetary consequences. We'll see the details later.
How do you define a loss? Like the guy who quits by a wedding.
That's a loss. That's a loss. That's why that's called a loss, or psychological loss, or the thing that what he gives a mashal. I'll give a mashal. When it says they used to soak flax in water. Now the time is right now. You have to take the flax out of the water, and I hire the workers to come. If you quit middle of the day, if I'm going to find new workers, it's going to be too late. It's going to get ruined. You know, they used to soak the flax and water. I don't know if you know how they used to do it.
Right.
And if it's the right time to take it out, they don't take it out in the right time. That's wrong.
Quantifiable loss. You quantify it.
Right.
I
I'm
was
saying.
to build a wedding.
The wedding is it's like the Gemara says. The Gemara gives a case by wedding. That's
we don't believe in psychological damage.
no. We cannot sue for stress. But if I hired you to play music, so now I'm going to have to hire someone a lot more to get him to play the last 3 hours of the wedding. I could later learn. I could hold back money from you, not to pay you, to pay.
At the wedding, if the guy packs up his music and he's gone, and then you're.
Yeah, there's nothing. Only money I could hold back is not to pay him. If I use that money to hire new musicians.
No, you can't get rid of musicians.
You can't get
There's, he did nothing. He did an avla. There's nothing you can do. There's no money. There's no suing. See what? Let me just say. What I used to talk. We spoke about a few months ago, and the people asked me. I have a professor, a from professor, lawyer. A lady asked me once to help her write many years ago. How's it called? A thesis, you say in English? And she wrote, and it was printed. In the Torah, there is no such a thing, psychological damage.
Punitive damages.
There's no punitive damage. The Bezdin can only put punitive.
What's
But
boisterous? Is embarrassment.
Yeah, but that's not because what we decide. Boishes is because I insulted you. How much money a person is willing to pay not to be insulted. But they're not talking about boishes. They're talking about, it was very stressful, the job. And, today in America, workers' comp, who asked you to come to work if you're stressed out? If you can't...
You can say the same thing here. What would a guy be willing to accept in funds to have the photographer leave in the middle of the wedding?
Yeah, but that's not boishes. Yeah, but that's not boishes. There is no money. There is no knas. He did a terrible thing. No, boishes, yeah, but it's not a stressful. It's boishes. It's only when it embarrassed you now.
It's not what the guy will never have, let's say, photography. The photographer leaves in the middle of the wedding. This guy will never have pictures the second half of his wedding because...
Okay, in Halacha there's no such a thing. So you won't.
But he's allowed to be a grudge?
You're allowed to be a grudge, yes. Tarumas. He's allowed to have tarumas.
Rabbi, can you explain the difference between the grandma versus the Rabbi?
This is over. This is a good notion. A guy you hide from music. I had a din Torah, Sarah din Torah. The guy hired a photographer, and he really took lousy pictures. I mean, I'm not good at photography, but even I was able to see. This was lousy. And what turned out, he showed in Bezdin that this guy never was a photographer. He advertised that he's a photographer. And I said, you don't have to pay him. So, he told me he has to give back the money. The down payment he has to give back. Nothing to do. It was just, there's no such, in Halacha. And let me explain what Saul wants. 1 second. Saul wants to know. This is a question what he wants to know. So now our wedding is not going to have pictures. When you're young, it's devastating. Where's the pictures? There's no money for that. You know what I mean? Boishes is a whole different sugya. But in the secular world, that's called stress. You could sue someone for that. The pictures didn't come out. You didn't play the right music or whatever. There's such a concept as stress. The only thing the Torah says is boishes, which is embarrassing someone in public, where there's that, but nothing else.
It has directly to do with stress.
Right. Well, boishes is stress. Right. But that's. That is true, but in secular world they talk about all different stress. The job is stressful. You want to ask something?
Yeah, could another way of looking at it be, let's say for example, in the case of your wedding band didn't show up, and then you could say that, well, the rest of the expenses that were incurred were all in vain because for all intents and purposes, the wedding wasn't complete.
No, we can't say that. Let me tell you, and let me just, that's a good question, but let me explain the question a little better. What happened was, someone came to the Torah with one of the caterers, I'm not going to say the name, and what happened was that he comes to I think it was a bar mitzvah or fancy, which wealthy people, I think it was a Sheva Brachas, and this lady had a whole theme, and I exactly comes, it's not what I ordered. The lady who sponsored the Shea Bruchas, one of the rich ladies, really, the money didn't mean much, but it's not what I ordered. But everyone ate and everyone enjoyed it. And then she didn't want to pay. She says, at first they were arguing, there is, and then, they pulled out the email, and the caterer made a mistake from one night to the other night. He pulled out the wrong menu. But, the bottom line is, she has to pay. She didn't say, okay, there is no Sheva Baruchas tonight. She enjoyed the food, and it was for her cheaper, because it was a cheaper night, and it wasn't what she wanted, just to pay. A guy got married, he got married. He would have loved to have music, and truthfully, his music is a very important part of a wedding. And the Shulchan Aruch says it's an obligation to have music, it's not just down. But in the Chanama, it's an emotional pain. But there's no.
By the Sheva Brothers,
yes.
They ate the food. Did they pay less?
They pay for the food value tonight. She really ordered of some fancy things for the next night.
Like any for pictures, if I hire a photographer and he takes lousy pictures, so
he didn't take the pictures.
One second. So if I say, hey, these are terrible pictures, I'm not taking them.
Right.
So
Then there's not to pay. Right. But if he's taking the pictures,
but if I want to keep the pictures, then I have to pay.
you have to pay. Correct.
Fair value.
The fair value, but not the value that he wanted. The value of an inexperienced photographer. Of an inexperienced photographer.
What's the value of that?
That's very difficult.
That's what
That's why
the entire.
I didn't tell you what it was all about.
They hire an expert.
So we asked around, and we made a bunch of phone calls. How much, there are people who did photography, the first jobs, how did you get the first job? How much did you pay? And we found out how it works. So we made a compromise. There's no clear number. Yes.
So a person can hypothetically just say, you know what, these pictures aren't what I want,
No.
or they weren't satisfactory.
No. That is very important what he just asked. We all know how to kvetch. Especially in LA, I would joke about it. In my house, I have a bunch of daughters. We all know how to kvetch perfectly. We have pictures, and I didn't come out nice on the picture. And I always tease my daughters. You always look at the picture. The first thing you look at is just yourself. How did I come out in the picture? But always this is an subjective thing. How you look at it. If the photography was good photography, it's your taste. There's no such a thing. No one, every job is going to be there. We're talking about this was not. It was very clear. This was, he was not a professional photography. I mean, it was very clear that the shadows, there were shadows all over. I mean, it was just.
Did he hold himself out as a professional photographer?
Yes, he gave him his card. He got engaged. He says, "I'm a photographer." Gave him his card. Gave him his card. I didn't ask too many questions. He really thought he was a photographer.
This case of the that we're learning here in Siman,
Yes.
that implies that there was a fraud to get a free loan.
Right.
I'm saying if there is
Yes.
fraud.
Yes. That what he's just saying is a very important point. Prosecutor must know these points. So what he's saying is, let me explain what he's really saying, and the Shulchan Aruch talks about it in Hilchos Gezela. What he's saying is that if a guy did it like a tchila to get paid and know that he was going to quit, that's fraud and he's a ganav. You understand? Let's say the guy planned it this way. This guy's a nice guy, I'm going to ask him, I said, to forward the money, give me the money ahead of time, and I'll quit. And I have the money, and I don't know, that's called a ganav. You should know, if a person takes a loan from someone, and he's not honest with the guy, you say, listen, I need a loan, I'm desperate for money, I have no idea how I'm going to get the money. The guy wants to give you, that's okay. But if you tell him, just a short loan, and next week the money's coming in, you hear these stories, and it's a lie, he had no idea he was going to pay, he's a ganav. There's two types I always tell people, two types of stealing, with a gun and with your tongue. So this guy stole with his tongue. He fools the guy and tells the guy that, that next week the money's coming in, I need. That's also called a ganav.
So you entitled to damages? holding them.
Well, but in the Torah there's no damage in such a thing, but he has to pay.
Doesn't the David and the Torah require that they pay back the amount plus?
No, that's gezel, or ganov, but that's when you take something away, not when your guy gave it to you, fooled them. It's a whole sugya. Even gezel is only when you grabbed it out of someone without permission. But if you fool them, it's different.
How does that practically evaluate it? How do you know what the guy was thinking before?
Oh, we don't know, but let's say there's proof. No, there's.
Oh, that's saying it has to be.
I've sat in
That's
bed.
where you find out that he did it to 4 other people.
Yes.
That's my question. Is that a good enough proof?
Yes.
Yeah?
It seems like the standard is a professional standard of the industry, as to whether the performance rises to that level. That seems to be implied, right? It's not according to the person who pays the money for the service, that it rises to his standard.
No, because we all have different standards. Not only we have different standards, every day we have different standards. You're in a good mood, you have a different standard. You're in a lousy mood, you have a different standard. That's very.
Can it be put in the contract that it should rise to the standard?
But if a person signs, he signs. But that's a foolish contract because you never. You're a photographer?
No, what I'm saying,
Because you know that it's like a seamstress, a lady who's a seamstress. I always think, I don't know how they do this job, these private seamstresses. Because all the ladies, I'm sure your wives at sitcom is, but women are very particular. It's that change this, and it's not so straight here, and then so it's always there's disputes about that. Okay.
Rob, the lady who does the shadow bracha, she wants a very fancy food, and they serve low-class food. Is that bullshit?
No. See, it's a very good question. Okay, since you paid Barab, he's asking a very good question. You heard Daniel, he's asking a very good question. Saying this lady is the truth is, that was why she was so angry. She is a very extremely wealthy lady. Money really didn't make it. Really, honestly, I'm saying money. This was a joke for her to make the show, but she wanted to just impress all the guests and order their fancy. They made a simple thing. So, first of all, boishes, the first rule of boishes, you have to have intent to insult. There was no intent to insult, then there's no boishes. If Rahman is like car, you hit a guy in a car accident, you didn't intentionally make the car accident, it was negligence, you have to pay, but you don't pay boishes. Boishes means I went and I have in mind to make boishes. Let me tell you what's the practicality of boishes nowadays. You know what it says in the Torah boishes? You know what it says? How does the Torah express some boishes? It's really frightening. Boish means embarrassment. The Torah says when a lady fondles someone's private parts. Sex abuse. That's what it says in the Torah. Hichzig bim vushav. The two men were fighting, and one of the wives wanted to, and she went and she touched them inappropriately. So sex abuse has to pay boishes. We don't know how much to pay, but I have a good friend who sat in the Torah, told me in New York, where a lady sued her uncle because he molested her. So what she really wanted, he should pay all her therapy. So she wasn't interested. And Bezdin said, if you don't want to go to court, she was going to take him to court, you have to pay for the next 10 years all of the therapy. That's boishes. It's very interesting because that boishes doesn't mean in front of 10 people. That boishes is usually they do it in the private, and it's such a devastating thing. That's boishes. It's interesting, but boishes has to be intense. It's not that I have a mind to insult you. It could be the guy does it because he's got his quirky Yetzer Hara, but it means he does it with intentions to do. It's not that he was driving and he was not paying attention, he got into an accident, that's why you got boishes. Or I turned around by mistake and somehow by mistake I did something. I do something intentionally, then there's boishes. Okay. Anyway, so the Mechaber says, we learn from this Kli b'nei Yisrael Avudim, Kalish is the slave for the. So the Kitzah, the Mechaber says, you can quit the job. Now I want to tell you interesting halacha. What happens if they made a special contract that you cannot quit? Is that binding or not? I said that normally you could quit. What happens? It says in the contract that you hired for a year and you're not allowed to quit. Yeah, so can you make such a now? Let me explain to you. What's the question? Let me explain what the question is. No. Let me say no. Let me just explain what the question is. The Torah says, if you marry a lady, you have to pay her shei ksis v'oina. You know what that means? You get paid for a house, food, and to be intimate. That means you are obligated to feed your wife and give her clothing, housing, the monetary. The Gemara says, what happens? You say to her, I'm going to marry you with the condition I'm not obligated to feed you, dress you, and put your dwelling. So we paskin that even though menat Torah you're obligated, but you could make a stipulation, a condition, and write in, I'm marrying you, but I will not be obligated to do these things. So we paskin out. So some Rishonim want to say here too. The Torah said normally if you hire someone, he has the right to quit. But if he made a condition, maybe just like a person marries a lady and he makes a condition that he's not obligated to the obligations, not obligated here too. The Torah says, gave him the right to quit, but you have a right to forfeit that quitting. Many Rishonim, two opinions. One opinion says you could make a contract, another opinion says no. Here the Torah says, I don't want you to be a slave. But if you make a contract and you become obligated, you became a slave. You follow? So it's two machlikas in the Rishonim. Yeah, but by money we say it's kind. We pass like a Rabbi, but by money like it's kind. Masnash kusa but money is chal. Follow? But here the Rishonim want to say maybe it's not chal, because here you're making me a slave. The Shem says I don't want you to be anyone's a slave.
The only reason that we have a slave and epidemic is a moment of thing though.
Stole because she stole money. Stole.
It's all
Yeah.
about money though.
Yeah, but what do you say?
It's all about money though.
Right. You stole money. So, right. But there's a din. The Torah says. Hashem is the Raisa the Rabban, but the Torah says unless an Eved Ivri is not allowed to do this only because he stole them and he has to pay. Let me explain another. Let me explain to you another thing. A guy owes money. This is very important. People always ask me, a guy owes money and he hasn't paid. So you tell him, you know what, go pack. He says, yeah, I don't have a job. So you tell him, I want you to go, we say, go pack bags and Ralphs. Get yourself, we call a schlepper job. You cannot force him. He's obligated to do that. But you cannot force him to go work to pay. Bezdin cannot force a guy. You understand? We could tell him, you're obligated, and a lawyer told me, a bunch of lawyers here, right? And legally also, you can't force someone, beat him up and tell him, get yourself a job and pay your debt. Right? There's such a law. What? But we could confiscate his furniture, but we cannot beat him up and say he's got to go to work. You know where the only time you can beat him up to go to work is to support his wife. He doesn't want to go to work. He says, I don't care, you don't work for yourself. But Bezdin says, you got married, you have a wife and children, we could beat you up to support your wife and the young children.
Why do they have that right?
Bezdin? That Bezdin is... No, it's not just... Bezdin has a right to... He's asking, what right do you have, hitting, or what right does Bezdin have? What is the question that you're asking?
What right does Bezdin have to, in this case, to force him?
Because he's not fulfilling his obligation. The Torah says you could force him to. The Gemara says to work for your wife. It's a joke in yeshiva. People say, "I'm a slave to my wife." For your wife, you're obligated to be a slave to make sure she gets. But for a person at work, you can't obligate him. The Gemara brings a pasuk. It's really a pasuk.
Does the wife have to actually go to Bezdin to complain, or does the Bezdin just observe that they could?
No, she has to file a complaint. She does have to file a complaint.
Is there a difference between the types of contracts in these examples, the last example you gave, where you make a contract you can't quit? There's two types of basic contracts: a performance contract and a services contract. You say, if I have someone that wanted to do a painting, and I say you can't quit because
I was going to get to it later, but you were asking. There's two types of contract, which we're going to see later, which is paid by the hour, I'm hiring you for today to pay. You have a contract, you have a worker. Or there's a contract, a job. The guy says, you come in, he says, I need you to paint this shul over here. So so the guy says, takes a look at it, I'm going to charge you $1,000. It's not nothing to do with time. That's the work that he's going to put. That's a whole, halacha doesn't apply then. You follow? That doesn't apply. It's only because he's obligated to work now. You're binding him to work right now. See, from this halacha we learn that really Hashem wants us to be free. That's what you see. The Torah did not want you to become a slave. But unfortunately, we are enslaved to our own Yetzer Hara. Drives us nuts, our desires and needs.
So from the son of the Poalim, he says, I promise you I will be with you for 2 months.
Promise?
Okay, so, I
promise is something else. I swear you have to keep your word. We're not talking about swear. We're not talking about swearing is a whole different thing. But we're not talking about swearing.
Contract, the verbal.
We're talking about verbal.
I will hire you. You have to stay until August, and that's our agreement.
Yes, that's the question. Can he quit now? Yes, that's the whole question now.
It's not hourly. It's a period that he.
Yeah, he's working, but he's working for not a job. He's working 8 hours a day. You want him to come into the business, and he'll help you out whatever you're doing.
It seems like the question is not whether he can quit. I mean, if he quits, there's nothing you can do about it. The question is do you write in what?
Well, there's two things. That when he quits, it's a sin. And second of all, he will soon see that since he's not allowed to quit, I'm allowed to hold back his salary and use the money, how much it'll cost me to finish the job. Now let me explain this, the next sif. Let me explain about it.
Do that anyway.
No. Let me just explain. He's asking a good question. That's much later in Shulchan, but it's important otherwise. No, he's asking like this. He's asking a practical question. You hired a guy to do a day's work, and you say he was hired to do work, and he quits in the middle of the day. So I don't have to pay him now. So since he's allowed to quit, because you hired him for time, so you have to pay him. Even though, let's say, you hired him for a day to paint this wall. This wall would have taken a day's work. He finished half. Now to get a guy to finish the second half will cost you a lot more money. You're not allowed to deduct the money from him. You have to pay him his half work that he did. But if he had no right to quit, where they learn cases where he has no right to quit, then if it costs me more to finish the job than a half, then I'm allowed to deduct money from the salary I owe you and to have the guy finish the job. Let's say a day's work would have been $1,000 to paint this wall. Middle of the day, he quits. So he's allowed to quit after paying $500. Even though if I want to look for a guy to finish the second half, it'll cost me $600. I'm not allowed to deduct. But if he has no right to quit, we'll later learn cases. Let's say you made a kinyan. If you hold a shtar, obligates him not to quit, and he quits, and it costs me now $600 to finish, I could deduct $100 from your and pay you $400 and pay the second worker $600. You follow?
But one second, but if you...
What, the difference is whether there's a star or not?
If he's allowed to quit, then it's Yuda El Yoinai. Then you cannot take off his money from anything. But if he has no right to quit, well, later on, the many cases, Moshe Dover Obadi has no right to quit. If there's a contract, according to many opinions, not allowed to quit, then if it costs me more money to finish the job, then I'm allowed to deduct money for that.
Wait, you previously said, so in a situation, if he could quit, you'd have to pay him for $500 and then you'd have to pay another $600 something. But if he completed the wall and did a bad job and I had to fix it, and
that's something else. Then he did the job that he was hired for. That's a separate issue.
So it's assuming the half.
Yes, he did his job half. The guy paints the whole wall, and it's a lousy job. This is a horrendous. I have to redo it. That he didn't do his job. It's like a Rabbi. I once said another thing to you. One of the rabbis I mentioned last week. One of the teachers would come late, and she always had an excuse. It was a lady teacher, so they fired her. You don't do your job. You don't have to. I don't have to. Legally, I was told by a lawyer that you have to write a whole memorandum. The guy told me that he had to fire one of his workers, and the lawyer told him, if you don't do exactly what I tell you, you're going to be sued. And he had to write to her that you're always on the phone with your boyfriend, and you're not taking this, and documented. And he did, and she tried to sue him, but he had everything documented. But Hamazel. But in the Torah, there's no such thing. The lady said, she came to the Torah, she said, my child was sick and this was a bum. It's not the school's headache if you can't come in time. You can't come in time. Your school cannot run this. It doesn't have to be a school. Even if you run your private business, you have a business. You know, the lady says, I had a headache, so I had to come a half hour late. Can't, it's excusable once in a while, but if it's continuously, then
The same concept with the dentist who somebody doesn't show up, or is that different?
that's a whole different story we spoke last week. That's a grumma. You cause them a loss.
What's the difference between a grandma and a grandma?
We're talking about the contract itself. That's a whole different. There's a loss. You cause them loss. That's because he didn't even start working. The dentist didn't. We spoke about last week. What happens? A guy has a dentist appointment or a therapy appointment. The guy doesn't show up. So the guy lost time. If you could have had people fill in that vacant spot, by you not showing up, he had lost money. That's called a grum. You have to pay. That's a grum of the halacha. Here we're talking about even if this guy never would have, couldn't find any workers to paint anyways. And it would have, he's waiting years to get, and you decided to help him, come paint it. It's a different concept. That's called the gruma, and this is called the poil. Working. It's a working contract.
The effect is the same.
Fact is the same. It's not always the same halacha, but later on there's differences.
What happens in the case of like an employee, whether it's the Rabbi or the teacher or the designer, whatever, you have an employee, you hire to do whatever to work for you, and they don't do a good job, and you then deduct their pay and say, hey, you didn't teach the kids well, or.
But the problem is, they don't do a good job. If you can't document it, that means it's subjective.
Well, what about
That's the way you see it. But if you could show they didn't do a job,
Well, I don't know, let's say I have a painting company, and the employees are supposed to paint the house, and the guy's just doing a lousy job. He worked, he did it, he painted.
well, you could deduct whatever because he didn't do the job that he was hired for. Yes, of course you could do. But you have workers and they don't do what you ask them to do.
Right.
Or you find them, you have a lot of work. You find them playing on the computer, cards, shopping.
Right.
I have a daughter tells me she also has many workers and she finds them shopping, so she put a filter on the computer. It'll work, you know what I mean? They email each other. He says I am as soon as whatever. So that's it's stealing. That's people don't know this. If you work for someone, from person works for from the Jewish. If you work for any person, doesn't have to be Jewish, even non-Jewish. The Shulchan says even you work for a non-Jewish person, and you wasted time, you are stealing money. You are ganav. This is very important because what did you say? So, yeah, it's stealing. You hire, he doesn't. No one wants. You don't have people at work who. Sometimes you just say it's part of my job. It's just shoplifting. What should I do? It's just we know the. What should I do? I know she goofs around, but what can I do? I'm going to be weak. Yes.
What happens if you borrow someone money and then you want that money back? The person says, I can't give it to you right now, and then you lose on an opportunity that you have on hand.
You never pay money for a loss of an opportunity. See, that's in secular law there is such a concept. When the Torah there is no such a concept.
But the contract was,
Yeah.
verbal contract was.
It has to pay by the first. Even a written contract. Even it's a written. So you have a written contract, you got to pay by July 1st. And the guy is not paying. And you lost a great opportunity to. So it's a loss of opportunity you never pay.
What if it's like 2 years late?
Doesn't make a difference. It's just 2 years opportunity lost. So it's just 2 years of 2 hurtful years. That's what it means. But it doesn't mean there's no recourse. You could make differently. You could write into the contract, give a loan to the person, and say that after 2 years there's a heter iske that kicks in. Interest and legally make an interest. I recently wrote a contract with someone who said, I don't trust he's going to pay me, but he still wanted to give him a loan. So we wrote a contract, and in 3 months he doesn't pay. We can make a kinyan now. It's a complicated, but that means that the interest will kick in.
That's in the beginning of
The contract, right?
not in the middle. In the middle, you can't change it.
See, I want to tell you all you guys something. I hate to do this, but I'm going to tell you something. You're a lawyer? I want to tell you something. You know, when a person comes to you alone, it's a big mitzvah to give him a loan. There's no question. But you got to remember that the banks is in the business of giving loans. And if they don't want to give him a loan, the guy's in trouble. That you have to remember a rule. I had a guy, a doctor came to me, and doctors have very high credit. There's no place to run. So this doctor told me that the guy asked him a loan $100,000, $50,000 of each of his credit card. And he asked me about, he's going to get mileage, asked me about maybe it's ribis. I explained to him it's not a problem with ribis, but he says, doctor, I want to tell you something. I'm not a businessman. I sit and learn all day. But it doesn't make sense to me that he's willing to pay interest for a credit card and the banks don't want to give him. And he looked at me, he just ignored me. I said to him again, you know what I mean? The banks don't want to give him a loan, which you can get for much cheaper. And then he comes back to me, and a few months later, and he says to me, thank you very much. Because he got home, his wife says, let's not give him a loan. It doesn't make sense. And 6 weeks later, he declared bankruptcy. It's a big mitzvah to give a loan, but it's a big mitzvah not to be a fool. Don't be foolish. It's a big mitzvah, but you got to be realistic. A guy wants a loan.
This guy was supposed to pay back like a couple of years ago, and after that, you can't raise the interest. Why not? Because the due date was 2 years ago.
Yeah,
why can't you raise the
because
the contract was over?
Because that's ribis. It's ribis.
Going back to the wages for a minute. Under California law, for example, you have to give someone a half-hour lunch every 4 hours. You have a 15-minute break. What if you tell your employee who's thrown, let's say, or I want to take a 5-minute lunch and don't take a break, right?
Spoke about it. He could do it.
The guy does. Now the guy takes the break. What's the?
It's stealing. If you made a deal with him, I don't want you. Then if the deal is a deal, I don't want you to take a break, and the guy takes a break. It's called stealing.
State law that we don't follow it.
I'm explaining that that's not the problem. You have a bunch of workers. That's not the problem. You find your workers wasting your time, just playing on the internet, or that's a terrible. Okay. So there's an interesting halacha now. The Rabbi says a very interesting. Mahai tama usel poil afel malamed, a teacher a soifer lahaskir atzmen is bebeis balabais bekva shula shunam. There's a very, doesn't happen nowadays. And once upon a time, a guy would hire himself, and he worked for the person a whole year, and they lived in the house. You see this stories about 200 years ago. They used to have these small villages, and a guy would come and teach the children. He would live in this family house, and would teach all his children Torah. Teach them, he was a wealthy person or whatever. So he would live there, and would have to, literally like a slave in the house, but his job was to teach. The halacha is you're not allowed to do it more than 3 years, based on the Gemara, that after 3 years you look like a slave. Even though he could quit, but it looks like you're living there 3 years, and after 3 years you look like a house slave. So you're not allowed to do that. If you doesn't, you can make a contract for 10-year contract, as long as I live in my own home. I have my own wife, and I live in my own home. But if you're living there,
you live with your wife in his home.
And he supports you, and live in, then it's called a slave.
Like
That's called a slave.
They have the butlers that,
Yeah, that's called a slave.
household staff.
Right, yeah, that's called a slave. Then you're in trouble.
What if they go home on the weekends or something like that?
If you go home, then it has to be
People
working.
they have like housekeepers that live in their house. Not many of us, but some of us.
So Okay,
So if they're going home, then it's okay, and then if
that's a good. We're talking about Eid.
so that, okay, 1 second, so that,
We're talking about Eid is should not hide himself for 3 years because then he looks like a slave.
You have a nanny who's Jewish,
Yes.
she's living in your house.
I had someone in my neighborhood who had a nanny. She's a doctor. She had a nanny from Eretz Yisrael, but they only worked for a few months because they liked the idea. She wanted a nanny who speaks Hebrew to teach her children Hebrew and she was a from girl. She would have 6 months of a year, but if she would hire herself 3 years, live over here, that would be the halacha you're not allowed to do.
Fire her and rehire her, like, is there some sort of like,
Well, she goes home. If she goes home, and truth is, she would go home every Yom Tov, then it wouldn't be such a problem. That's good enough.
sort of like uninterrupted?
Right.
Shach is only the person's not poor, like they have a liquor now, so.
Shach says that it's only when he's not so poor that if he's extremely poor, you're allowed
What
to.
about Malama, that's all, this is only Parnassus, so.
Saying if he doesn't have what to eat, mamish, Shach says,
That is how he makes his living.
well, he's not. If he has another way of living and he just wants to do this, that's why it's awesome. If the Shach is saying if a guy has no choice, no choice, that's what the Shach is talking about. You understand? When a guy has no choice, the Shach says it's okay because you're allowed to sell yourself as a slave. That's the Shach's kasha. So that's different. Okay, let's try to start Sif Dalet.
These little things that we're learning with the remote here, these are not like disputing with Congress thing, right? It's
No,
just
no.
kind of like adding to it.
It's adding, not disputing. It's adding. So he says, Keitzet din apoyel, the way side, din apoyel shechuzaboy, achas hiskol. This is what I just explained to him. How do we look at this thing? A worker starts working, and he changes after he starts working. He says, Shumaloi mash usa. So let me, we only have about 5 minutes. So let me explain this. I'll look how this works. So, again, let me to make it simple because there's going to be cases that's more complicated. The most simple thing is that if a guy quits his job, I hired someone to do a job, he quits in the middle. To hire someone to finish the job is always more expensive. Let's say that happened to one of the local schools. One of the rabbis quit the middle of the year. He got a better opportunity. I forgot what it was, and he quit the middle of the year. To hire someone to teach in the middle of the year to get a rabbi is very expensive. And they hired immediately someone, but it was very expensive. Theoretically speaking, the school paid him. He didn't wait, but the school didn't pay him. The school paid him, but that means the school would have a right to hold back the payment that they owe him to pay the new worker the higher wages. Let's say they pay this rabbi teaching $3,000 a month. Okay, that's for the sake of it. And now, in the middle of the year, he quit. Now, to get someone the rest of the year, we have to pay $3,500 a month. We have a right to take off from his money to make sure, because he quit, and this in a case where he was not allowed to quit. In a case where he was no right to quit, then this. If a case where he has a right to quit, even though it costs him money,
If you don't owe him money,
then we're stuck. Nothing we can do.
then there's what?
There's nothing to do. But that's the difference. If he's a right to quit, then even though it costs more money, he has no right to quit, then he has to pay the difference.
Teachers, they usually put a you are not allowed to quit clause.
It's thus say, that you have to, the standard, they do write that in nowadays.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be in the school's best interest that if he wants to quit, let him quit? I mean, who wants a teacher?
That's not true. It's very hard to find someone in the middle of the year. Extremely difficult.
Who teach you has a better job? This guy's,
Yeah, it's very hard to find someone to teach in the middle. This is
Or a teacher just doesn't want to, he's not motivated anymore. Just doesn't
yeah,
wanna
but
continue to teach.
you're right. Everything has to do with yes.
I've heard of a synagogue around here that hires girls to teach, and they put in a clause in the contract that if they should find a shidduch in the middle of their work, that there's a clause preventing from doing that. Is that an acceptable practice?
Well,
Why not?
that would be the two opinions. If a person is, if you write into the contract, you're not allowed to quit, can you quit or not? That would be we have the two opinions of that.
It's not even saying that you can't quit, it's saying that you're not allowed to
Date.
engage in certain activities while you're under employment.
Same idea. It's
Can
not,
you tell someone not to get pregnant? I mean, when you're on that
no,
subject.
no, you can't.
That's what it sounded like to me. I didn't like it.
So I want to quickly add another story that someone asked me a while ago. The school was not paying in time. The school was not paying in time. They said in the contract, I read the contract, and it says, we're obligated to pay you. And the school was late. And she was offered a great job. So she asked me, can she quit? I said, the fact that they're not paying you in time is a breach of their contract. You're allowed to quit. And of course, the school called me up, and I said, yes, I said it. The executive of the school called me up, was very annoyed with me. I says, yes. I said, you were not paying in time. It happened to be, she needed the money, and she had a good opportunity. But it works both ways. He's not allowed to quit, but you have to pay in time. If you don't pay in time, that's a breach of your side of the contract.
Pay everything they owe.
What?
Still have to pay everything they owe.
They still have to pay, but
They breached the contract.
they breach a contract. You're allowed to quit because you have to. It's not because it happens to be she needed the money, but even if she didn't need the money, let's say she's wealthy independently. Then the money's extra money. If they don't get paid, I mean that's a breach of contract. Then she's allowed to quit. You understand? Okay, we'll finish this next week.